Now for my plyo box, it's going to be slight different dimensions than a standard one, which will be the 20 by 24 by 30. So I'm going to be doing 8.5 by 24 by 30. So you'll still get those two bigger dimensions, but the smaller dimension is going to be reduced by 1.5 inches in order to accommodate that it could all be cut out onto one sheet of plywood, the best I could figure out. I've already laid out all my cuts on this one sheet of plywood. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 boards that we're going to need, and we're going to end up with 2 pieces of scrap. Now you can lay out your cuts like this, but you'll want to remeasure after every major cut to the board. So laid it out so that way it's hot dog shaped. I'm going to move over here to our 4 foot by 8 foot sheet of plywood. And we're going to do our first cut 18.5 inches in. We're going to cut that long that way. And then we can cut that section in half. And that'll give us 2 boards that are 24 by 18.5. And that'll be good for this side. I'm going to move over to this side and cut 30 inches in. A big cut across. And then I'm going to cut that in half. And that'll give us 24 inches by 30 inch boards. That'll be 2 of those. And I understand we're going to be losing a little bit right there that will make that slightly less than 24, but we've done the same thing over there, so those boards will be identical, and that'll be good. And we're going to be losing that because of the kerf. And what the kerf is the width of the saw blade, and that's going to be the wood that's cut out. And that's why I measure, and that's why I recommend remeasuring every time you make a major cut. Now I'm going to zoom in right here. We're going to see that I've actually drawn in for the kerf, which is typically a 1/8 inch width for that saw blade. And so when I end up cutting, I'm going to lose what's in between these 2 parallel lines, most likely. And I'll want to remeasure to make sure that from there to there is still another 30 inches. Okay, so when we've done that, we're going to go ahead and make another big cut, 30 inches from our new end, and we're going to cut 2 more times horizontally, 18.5 inches down, and then from the bottom, 18.5 inches down. And we're going to be left with this lossage or spare piece for later, which we're not going to use on this project. Now lastly, we're going to go back to this section here. Hopefully we have 17 1/8 left width, and we're going to want a piece that's 22 5/8 down. And I've measured for the kerf, so it looks like we're good. It looks like it's just perfect. So I want to make sure every cut is exactly straight, so these match up really well. For making 4-foot cuts on a sheet of plywood, I use my circular saw with my circular saw guide. This is easier than pushing a full sheet of plywood across a table saw. I set aside this 17 1/8 inch section so I could cut that later. Now I could make the rest of these cuts with the circular saw, but for my own speed I decided to make them on the table saw. And it turned out really nice with this table saw that I purchased from Lowe's. With all of our major cuts completed, I have my 18.5 by 24s, my 18.5 by 30s, and then my 24 by 30s. So you notice I have this scrap still here, which is theoretically going to be a 22 5/8 by 17 1/8. I'm going to leave that till the very end when I know for sure the true inner dimensions and how to cut those out. For now, I'm going to start with the interlocking abilities of these boards. These boards will be interlocked similar to a puzzle, where an edge will either receive a nook or a cranny, and then its complementary piece will receive the opposite. I'm first going to mark off the perimeter of the board with the thickness of the board,
and then mark off the 1/3 and 2/3 sections to create 3 sections on each edge. And an edge will lose either the interior section or both of its exterior sections. For example, the board that's 18.5 inches on one side and 24 on the other, the 18.5 inch will lose the interior section. And then its complementary board, the 18.5 by 30, on the 18.5 side, it'll lose the exterior sections. And this will allow them to join together, where a portion of each board will be lying on the other. I did most of this project with the jigsaw. However, I did cut some of the exterior notches out with the table saw and then finished them off with the jigsaw.
Alright, with every project you learn so much, and this time I learned to make my measurements before any cuts. So for my 30-inch size, I wanted 10-inch sections before my cuts. I was just measuring 10 inches from the sides to make sure that I stayed true to that. I did 10 inches from these sides, cut this out, and I got a nice 10-inch section there. However, on this piece, I made my cuts on this edge first, the 18.5 inch side first. So I lost a 1/4 inch there, and when I did my 10-inch measurement to here, I lost a 1/4 inch. So my little notch here, you could see it line up, is actually a little smaller. Now I'm going to go ahead and just glue in some wood to fix this issue, because it's not really structural at this point. We still got enough wood here to do the supporting. But for you at home, when you're making this, make sure that your measurements are done before any cutting.
I found it helpful to dry fit all the sides together first and use clamps to pull some of the pieces together. Then by removing one piece at a time and gluing and screwing it, I was able to create a nice square box. I took a piece of scrap from my cutouts and I used that to create a template for my drill. The template would allow me to evenly space the screws quickly from both the edge and from each other. Each hole I drilled would be counterbored before putting a screw in. While I waited until my box was partially assembled to put the handles in, you can do it before assembly. I drew a rectangle in the top center of the board, and then I used a Forstner bit to drill out the 4 corners, and used a jigsaw to connect the 4 corners. Lastly, going over the edges with both a router and a sanding block. Before sealing up this Plyo box, we're going to have to put the brace in and find its true measurements. The internal measurements for my brace were 17 1/16 by 22 1/16, which were just a 16th off on each side from my measurements. The brace should fit in snugly where it's not putting too much pressure on the exterior boards. Otherwise, those boards might bow, causing it to rock. Lastly, we need to finish off the edges of our box with a roundover. You could do this with a router. Just make sure that your screws will not interfere with the roundover bit. Otherwise, you might need to remove them before proceeding. Thank you for watching my video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, consider subscribing or checking out one of these other videos.